Good morning, Conway Cougars. Let's continue with the reading of our book, Ghost. Of course, after about 5 or 6 minutes of not quite running, not quite walking, I had to stop and figure out exactly where I was going. Didn't want to head home. I could have. It would have been safe, but I just didn't want to go there. When I'm there by myself for too long, the house becomes some kind of time machine, teleporting me back 3 or 4 years, listening to my mom and dad fight and scream every night. Taking me back to all the bad stuff, so that was out. There was only one other place I thought was safe enough to go, Mr. Charles's store. When I got there, Mr. Charles was talking to a delivery man. He signed a piece of paper, one of those 3-in-1 papers, and a guy in dusty blue overalls ripped the pink one from the bottom and gave it to Mr. Charles. Then the guy grabbed his metal carrier thing on wheels and rolled out. "Castle?" Mr. Charles said in his loud voice. He folded the pink piece of paper in half and tucked it somewhere behind the counter. He turned the TV down, then checked his watch, clearly confused about why I wasn't in school. But instead of just asking, he asked the usual. "Let me guess. Sunflower seeds?" He snatched a bag off the wall. I wasn't even really thinking about sunflower seeds, but I did skip lunch, and since he brought it up, "Let me guess. $1, I replied, as usual, digging into my pocket for a buck. "Nope. $10, Mr. Charles said, pulling the seeds back off the counter. $10? I snipped. "What do you mean, $10? Sunflower seeds cost you $10 from now on until you tell me why you are not in school." Mr. Charles held his hand out, waiting for me to put the $10 I didn't have in it. Then he shrugged and put the sunflower seeds back up on the hook. "Mr. Charles," I moaned, "are you serious?" "Serious as a heart attack," he said, so predictably that I could have said it for him. I looked at him for a second, trying to give him my best puppy dog face, even though I wasn't sure I even had one. "Won't work," he said. I leaned against the glass of the big fridge. "Mr. Charles kept the deli meats in." "Okay," I huffed. I left after social studies because kids were laughing at me. Mr. Charles came from behind the counter, propped himself up against the ice chest. "Come again?" I said I left after social studies. Kids were laughing at me, this time louder. "Laughing at what?" I didn't say nothing. I just hiked my pants up and let my shoes do the talking. Mr. Charles looked down at my mangled kicks and dropped his mouth open. "What did you do?" he asked, stepping back to get a better view. "I cut them," I said, flat out, letting my pants drop back down. "I can see that, but why?" I wanted to rip open my backpack and say, "To make them more like these," but I didn't, because then Mr. Charles would have wanted to know where I got those dope kicks from and all that, and the next thing you know, he would have jacked the price of the sunflower seeds up to $100. I'm on a track team now, and they all got good shoes, low tops. And you can run better in low tops. "So you hacked half your sneakers off?" "Pretty much," I said. "Cool. And today, when some of the kids noticed, they laughed. So I left. Please don't tell my mom." I'd been saying that a lot lately. Mr. Charles sighed, then went back behind the counter. He took the bag of seeds back off the hook and set them in front of me. "Okay, this one's on me," he said, but when I reached for them, Mr. Charles wouldn't take his hand off of the bag. But no more running out of school. especially just because people are laughing at you. People are always going to be laughing at you, Castle. Trust me. You been laughed at? I asked. I was willing to bet that he never got made fun of. I mean, there was the whole you look like a white James Brown thing, but I wasn't sure if anyone else noticed that or if it was just me. And then there was the almost deaf thing, but I figured that was just because he was old. No big deal. Other than that, what could anyone tease Mr. Charles about? Ha! He hooted. Of course I have. I get laughed at all the time, son. Listen, I come from a family of Einsteins. My brother's a doctor. My sister's a big-time college professor at one of those smarty universities. Both my parents were lawyers, and me, I sell you sunflower seeds. What's wrong with that? I asked. Shoot, having your own store seemed like a sweet deal. You ain't never got to pay for no groceries. Nothing is wrong with that. Not to me and you, but to them. Oh, they look at me like some kind of letdown. You know what they call this place? Charlie's Little Store. He said, his voice now more serious. Little? Don't you ever let someone call your life, your dreams little. Hear me? I nodded. He continued, all fired up. Because while they're out there sniffing their own butts, I get to hang out with a big man like you. A future world's greatest, and that's cool. Mr. Charles smiled big, warm. So we got a deal? No more skipping school. No more skipping school, I agreed all quick. He lifted his hand from the bag, but before I could take it, he slapped his hand back down on it. You're not just saying that to get the seeds, are you? He said, now glaring at me. Nah, man, for real, no more skipping school. He let go of the sunflower seeds, and I snatched the bag before he changed his mind. But I didn't breeze out of the store like I normally do. I was still kind of paranoid about being busted by the cops, slammed up against the wall, searched, caught with fancy running shoes in my backpack, and thrown in jail, where the cafeteria food is worse than the schools and the hospitals. So I just hung around the store, eating my seeds, while Mr. Charles went through inventory. He had just gotten a drop-off of new stuff: sodas, chips, cleaning products, cereal. You can't just hang out here, Castle. I mean, you're my guy. But you see that sign? Mr. Charles pointed to the one on the window. No loitering. Ain't nobody loitering. You don't see me just spitting seeds on your floor or nothing like that. I protested. I opened my hand so that he could see that I had been spitting them into my palm. No, not littering. Loitering, Mr. Charles said, ripping open a box. Means you can't just stand around. Oh, well, you want me to help you with some of these boxes? I asked, hoping he'd say yes, because the only other place I could go was the bus stop, and that was too out in the open. Either that or the track, but I was going to end up there later anyway. After yesterday, I wasn't down for another double practice. Plus, if the cops were out looking for a kid who stole track shoes, they might show up where the kid might be using them. So it was best to not be out there in the middle of the day alone. Mr. Charles studied me for a moment, then thrust a box of cat food in my arms. Here, help me unpack this. The process was simple. There should be 5 of everything everywhere, which was really just a weird way for Mr. Charles to keep the store looking neat and organized, and also an easy way for him to know if people were stealing from him. So for instance, in the fridge, there should be 5 of every soda, 5 of every juice. On the cereal shelf, there needed to be 5 of every kind of cereal, even the nasty ones that taste like dirt until you put sugar on it. Same went for the chips and cookies. So my job was to look around the store and let Mr. Charles know what was missing. We need 2 oranges, I said, thumbing through the juices like I was looking for a shirt in the coldest closet ever. Mr. Charles, as usual, didn't hear me. I looked over. He was reading another piece of paper. This time it was one that he pulled from a box. I think it was like a receipt or something to tell him what he was supposed to have in each carton. He never even looked up. Didn't hear me at all. Dang, I wonder what it must be like to be hard of hearing. I bet gunshots sound like knocks on the door, which is a scary thought. Sheesh. Anyway, I repeated myself louder. Mr. Charles, this time he looked up, we need 2 orange juices. Mr. Charles nodded, pulled 2 from a box, and handed them to me. Of course, while we were doing all this, I kept an eye on my backpack. I had to set it down in the corner of the back of the store. Every time we'd restock some cookies or some dishwashing liquid, I would double check to make sure it was still there, that my sweet silver babies were still safe. After the counting and restocking was done, Mr. Charles asked me to move all the leftovers into the stockroom. No problem, I said, struggling to get a grip on the sides of one of the bigger cardboard boxes. Is there any order you want me to put them in? Nope, Mr. Charles said, now wiping down the counter. Just stack it all up towards the back so I can get in there and move around. That's all. One by one, I picked up boxes of ramen noodles, 6 packs of beer, and cases of Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire, gotta be a word record for the hardest word. One by one, I picked up the boxes of ramen noodles, 6 packs of beer, and cases of Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire, gotta be the world record for the hardest word. And moved them from the stockroom. Mr. Charles seemed to have relaxed and was now standing behind the counter, staring at his old TV again. That made me feel kind of good, like I was doing something to help the old man out. I mean, he had always been so cool to me, such a good dude, so it felt nice to be able to do something nice for him. Plus, he was getting up there in age. He even had that weird, flappy turtleneck thing. So lifting these boxes was probably getting pretty hard for him. The 6th, or was it the 7th, box was the heaviest. It was filled with gallons of water, which was crazy because it just doesn't seem like water should be that heavy. I mean, it's clear, like air, and air don't weigh nothing. I couldn't even really lift the box. I just kind of held my arms straight and did the caveman walk to the stockroom, bumping into everything, including the stockroom door, hoping I'd make it there before my shoulder pops out of socket. The door closed behind me. I dropped the box and used my feet to slide it across the room over to the other boxes. Then I stopped and for the first time had a look around. I can't tell you what I remember, anything about what the stockroom looked like when me and my mom hid in it, but I know we were in the corner, a corner where there was now a coat rack. I remember that me and Ma huddled right there up against the wall, holding me by the face, her hands covering my ears. Now when I think about it, I think she did that so that I wouldn't hear her crying or breathing hard, even though I could feel her chest rising and falling at the exact same pace of my own thumping heart. But I don't remember there being any boxes. I don't remember the desk and file drawers, the clock on the wall, or the $5 bill hanging in a frame. It all might have been there, but I just don't remember seeing it. And looking at it, then, gazing around the room, I didn't really feel nothing. Like no emotions until I tried to open the door. It wouldn't budge. I tried again. The knob turned, but the door wouldn't come loose. I knocked lightly, trying not to panic, but of course, Mr. Charles couldn't hear me. He was probably deep in his cowboy flick, and he was on the other side of the store. And on top of that, he was practically deaf. So I banged, still nothing. Then I started tripping. Like how, when you at the swimming pool on the hottest day of summer, and you jump in and it's cool, and then you take one step too far and suddenly you're in the deep end, and things ain't so cool no more because you can't swim. That's how I felt, like I was drowning, like I was filling up with water, like this place, this weird little room that had saved my life, now felt like it was going to take it. I looked at that corner again, my mind boomeranging back to me and Mom, crouching and crying, wondering if my dad would corner us. My heart began to hammer, just like it did back then. The clock on the wall suddenly seemed to tick louder. I turned back around and beat on the door again, tried to beat a hole through it, balled my hand into a fist and pounded and pounded and pounded, yelling Mr. Charles's name till at last, after what seemed like forever, I could hear him on the other side of the door. "Castle, I'm here," his voice came through muffled. Mr. Charles yanked it a few times, each time letting out a weird grunt, until finally the door swung open. He stumbled back into the chip display before finally catching his balance. I shot out of the room. "Stupid thing gets stuck," he tried explaining, but I couldn't wait around to hear about it. One more minute and I would melt in the aisle between the chips and the sodas. So I grabbed my backpack and ran straight for the door.